Hello and welcome to today's lesson. I'm your hard-working but indefatigable teacher, Mr. Burton. You will need to watch this video and take notes as you go. You may need to watch certain parts of the video a few times to ensure complete understanding. This is your homework and I will check your notes tomorrow before we get started. I hope you learned something.
Okay, on to today's topic. Our very first topic in IB Economics, the foundations of economics. Economics is fundamentally about three different economic questions. What, how, and for whom? These are really questions about allocation, production, and distribution. So our first question, what? The allocation question. All economies need to choose the combinations and quantities of the particular goods and services that they produce. They can't produce everything, so we must decide which ones we want and how much of it do we want. The how question is how to use our resources to produce the goods and services that we want. Now, different combinations of the factors of production can be used to produce goods and services. We can use lots of labour and have low unemployment, or we can use lots of machines, more efficient, more productive, but perhaps there's more unemployment in the economy. And by using different skill levels of labour and by using different technologies to produce our goods and services. And distribution, who gets what? So we must choose the goods and services, how they're going to be distributed among the population. Are they going to be evenly distributed? Is everyone going to have access to a similar level of goods and services? Or will the lion's share go to a few elite? Now, some are going to argue that everyone getting an equal amount of goods and services, and others are going to argue that some people are going to get more than others, or should get more than others, perhaps because they work harder, perhaps because they've got more resources to employ, perhaps because they've got better skills than other people. Now, some further arguments can be made that some goods and services, such as healthcare and education, should be distributed more equally among the population, and other goods and services such as handguns and assault rifles should be less evenly distributed. Perhaps your society decides that not everybody should be in possession of a dangerous weapon. Distribution, a quick video.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution, and 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are. Teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right. Just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now, let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Okay, so we can see already that these questions are very interesting. Right, 3 central tenets of economics: scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. 3 interrelated factors here. So scarcity, we define that as being a situation in which available resources or factors of production are finite. That means they're limited in some way. And whereas what businesses could possibly produce, want, are infinite. And there are not enough resources to produce everything that consumers need and want. And because we have this scarcity, businesses are going to need to make choices. And these choices are about what goods and services to produce. And as soon as a choice is made, we have an opportunity cost. So the next best available alternative that's foregone when a choice is made. A farmer could grow apples or oranges. If the farmer produces apples, then the opportunity cost is the income or the revenue or the profit that is lost on the oranges she didn't produce. So opportunity cost, a very important concept in economics. The next best available alternative that's foregone when making a choice. Now, we assume that firms devote their scarce resources, these are called factors of production, to producing the most profitable goods and services. And when they do that efficiently, they will maximize their profits. And consumers need to make a choice as well as to what goods and services they are going to buy and consume. And again, as soon as they make a choice, there's an opportunity cost. I go to the supermarket, I buy an apple, perhaps the opportunity cost is the consumption of the orange. I have foregone consumption of the orange when I made the choice to consume an apple. And in economics, we assume that consumers devote their scarce resources, and resources are scarce. There's only a certain amount of money, only a certain amount of time available to us to earn that money to purchasing the goods and services which bring us the greatest welfare for each dollar we spend.
Show me.
Scarcity is the basic economic problem that arises because people have unlimited wants, but resources are limited. Because of scarcity, various economic decisions must be made to allocate resources efficiently. Some wants must be given up so that others can be achieved. The fact that choices have to be made about how to use limited resources to meet unlimited wants affects individuals, businesses, industries, governments, and even the worldwide economy. It is an important concept for the study of consumer demand and how individuals and business make consumption, production, and investment choices. At the individual level, time is an example of a scarce resource. The hours you spend working to make an income are hours that you don't spend relaxing or with your family. At the business level, money is an example of a scarce resource. The dollars spent on rent, wages, and raw materials are dollars that don't go towards profit. On the government level, land is an example of a scarce resource. With only so many square miles of usable land available, agencies from city councils to the federal government must make decisions about the best use of space. Land turned into a park is land that cannot be used for roads or houses. Ultimately, scarcity is all about compromise. In order to gain one resource, you must cut back on another.
Okay, so that was the economic problem in a nutshell. Scarcity, choices, opportunity cost.
Show me.
Opportunity cost is what a person sacrifices when they choose one option over another. Tony is a sous chef at one of the best restaurants in the city. He earns a respectable salary of $50,000 a year. It's a good job, but he thinks he can do better. So he decides to start his own restaurant called Tony's Bistro. In the first year, he earns only 25% of what he made as a sous chef, or $12,500. The opportunity cost of starting his own business is the other 75% of the income that he would have made if he had stayed at his old job, or $37,500. Tony doesn't make too much for the first 4 years his restaurant is open, and his opportunity costs are high. He only earns $50,000 instead of the $200,000 he would have earned at his old job. So his opportunity cost is $150,000. Suddenly, in year 5, Tony's Bistro starts receiving rave reviews from food critics and earning top rankings from Zagat and Michelin. Business is booming, and he is making 5 times as much as he made at his old job, or $250,000 a year. He realizes that if he was still working as a sous chef, his opportunity cost would now be $200,000 a year. Although Tony sacrificed income and his opportunity cost was high in the short term, in the long run, His opportunity cost would have been higher if he had not opened his own restaurant.
So, back to the fundamental problem in economics. Scarcity, must make choices, and each choice that we make produces an opportunity cost. Let's have a quick look at needs and wants and how that relates to resources. So needs are different to wants. Our needs and wants are different, very different. We need some things just to stay alive: water, food, shelter, warmth. And this is different to wants. Our wants are never ending. We say they're infinite because once we've satisfied one, we move on to the next. Resources used to produce the goods and services are in limited supply. They're finite, not infinite like wants. And collectively, resources are called factors of production. And resources can be divided into four different groups. Labour, capital, enterprise, and land. All the factors of production, which are resources available to us to produce goods and services. The definition for land is the natural resources available for production. So it doesn't just refer to physical space, the land that we walk over. Some nations have a large amount of a particular natural resource and they're able to specialize in the extraction and production of it. And a good example would be North Sea oil and gas in Britain and Norway. Natural resources. Labour, this is a human input into the production process. Not all labour is of the same quality. Our hardworking IB economics students would be both intelligent and industrious, and when they hit the labour market, they're going to be very productive. Every person has different skills and qualifications, and together we call that human capital. When people have more human capital, they're likely to be able to be more productive, which means that they can produce more in the same period of time. Capital in economics means investment goods that are used to produce other goods in the future. And examples here include the plant, the machinery and equipment that businesses use, technology implemented, new technology developed, factories and buildings. Capital goods used to create other goods and services. An enterprise is putting it all together. So that's the idea of having ideas, taking risks, establishing and running a business. An entrepreneur is someone involved in taking these risks, perhaps by putting their money or having the ideas and drive to set up and run the business. And the reward for being an entrepreneur is profit. We have different sectors of the economy that are productive. Now, the production of nearly all goods and services uses up scarce resources. Nearly all. Production takes place in one of three different sectors, and we have the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. Primary is all about the extraction of raw materials. It's getting that oil, that gas, the minerals, agriculture, horticulture, fishery, forestry. Secondary, where those raw materials are taken and manufactured into goods. So we're talking things like car manufacturing, producing computers, mobile phones, etc., etc. And tertiary refers to the service sector, things like banking, tourism, education. If you can't touch it, it's a service. A quick look at the factors of production here. So these refer to an economic...
Factors of production is an economic term describing the general inputs used to produce goods and services to make a profit. Under the classical view of economics, the factors of production consist of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land refers to the land itself as well as the raw materials that come from the land. This includes timber, coal, precious minerals such as gold and water. It can also mean the physical area on which a factory sits. Labor refers to the workers who answer the phones, lift the pallets, drive the trucks, push the paperwork, and do all things physical and intellectual to keep a business running. Capital refers to the buildings, machines, and tools used in the process of production. Capital is anything from a fleet of delivery trucks, to a factory building, to a printing press, or a computer. Intellectual capital is defined as the technological expertise a business acquires over time, its trade secrets, and unique business processes. There is also social capital, the ability to operate because society has agreed to a system of order, conduct, and law. These elements facilitate an economic environment that allows the business to operate. Finally, entrepreneurship is the factor of production that ties the other three together. The entrepreneur provides innovation and creativity in the use of the other factors, which helps create a profitable business. For simplicity and analytic purposes, economists and analysts usually focus attention on two main factors, capital and labor. The relationship of both these factors and a company's output is referred to as the production function.
Okay, so factors of production, inputs used in the production of goods and services. Organized hopefully to make a profit, at least from a business perspective. We must make a distinction between goods and services.
Show me.
When you grow up, there are a lot of different jobs you can do. People can pay you to fly planes, build buildings, bake cakes, or be a doctor. You can also sell things to people, such as cars, clothes, books, or even pets. The first group of things are services. The second group of things are goods. So, what is the difference between goods and services? Goods are things that you can touch, feel, and take home with you. If you buy a good, you then own it. Services are things other people do for you, which you pay them for. If you get a haircut, that is a service because you are paying the hairdresser to cut your hair. If you pay a bus driver to take you somewhere, that's also a service. You can't touch a bus ride or take it home with you. A bus ride is a service, not a good. Let's look at some more examples. Every day in Shopville, people are buying goods and services. Let's look at some of the things they buy. Your teacher will pause the video and you can guess which ones are goods and which ones are services. Remember, goods are the things that you can touch, feel, and take home with you. Services are things that you pay people to do for you. Okay, here we go. This is Jenkins. Today, he went to the shops and bought some clothes, some books, and got his bike fixed. Which of these are goods and which of these are services? Why don't you pause now and figure out which one is which? Great job. Clothes and books are goods because they are things that you can take home with you. Getting your bike fixed is a service because Jenkins paid the repairman to do something for him. Now let's see what Sally is doing in Shopville today. Today, Sally went to the post office and paid for a letter to be delivered. She also had lunch at a restaurant and bought a new TV. Which of these things are goods and which are services? Why don't you see if you can work out which of those things are goods and services? Well done! Sally paid for two services today. Mailing the letter was one service and the other service was lunch. She paid the people at the post office to mail her letter and she paid the people at the restaurant to cook her lunch. She also bought a TV, and this is a good because she could take it home with her. So remember, goods are things that you can touch, feel, and take home with you at the end of the day. Services are things you pay other people to do for you.
A good little video there makes a clear distinction between what is a good and what is a service. Right, our economic problem, 4 parts. Allocation of resources, problem of economic efficiency, problem of economic growth, and fourth, the problem of full employment of resources. Okay, allocation of resources. This problem arises because we have scarcity of resources. And this specifically refers to which wants should be satisfied and which are going to be left unsatisfied. So, in other words, what to produce and how much of it to produce. Now, the more production of a good implies more resources are going to be required for the production of it. And we know that resources are scarce. So, taken together, these two facts mean that if a society decides to increase production of some good, it's going to need to withdraw some resources from the production of other goods. In other words, more production of a desired good can be made possible only by reducing the quantity of resources used in the production of other goods. Now, because resources are scarce, it's important to use them as efficiently as possible. We'll get the most bang for our buck if we do this. Now, this is essential to know if the production and distribution of national product made by an economy is as efficient as it can be. The production becomes efficient only if the productive resources are used in such a way that any reallocation does not produce more of one good without reducing the output of any other good. In other words, efficient distribution means that any redistribution of goods cannot make anyone better off without making someone else worse off. The inefficiencies of production and distribution exist in all types of economies, every single economy around the world. And we know that from that definition, from this fact, the welfare of the people can be increased if these inefficiencies can be minimized, eliminated even. Now, scarce resources means the question of whether all available resources are being fully employed is an important one. Now, an economy should achieve maximum satisfaction by using the scarce resources it has in the best possible manner. So resources that an economy has should not be wasted or used inefficiently. However, in economies, the available resources are not fully employed. In times of recession, there are many people willing and able to work who go without employment. It supposes that scarce resources are not fully being used in a typical economy. Economic growth. If the productive capacity of an economy grows, it means that that economy is going to be able to make progressively more goods and services. And the more goods and services that are made, the more goods and services are consumed, and this is going to result in a rise in the standard of living for the people in that economy. The increase in productive capacity of an economy is called economic growth, and there are various factors affecting economic growth, including the allocation of resources to capital goods, the investment in technology and skills and education training to raise the productivity of labour. This part of the economic problem is studied in the economies of development.